while the tumult of the battles taking place a few kilometers away could be heard all night. Several French units took advantage of the darkness to cross the Sambre-Aloise Canal, with the aim of reinforcing the French positions further east, threatened by two powerful German armored divisions. It is at this hour, as the sun is just beginning to rise, that these men on the move fall at the exit of the city, on a column of tanks that they can barely make out and do not recognize. Confused, one of them approaches the column and asks one of the tank officers sticking his head out of his vehicle. English. And in response, the Frenchman receives a firm order to surrender in broken French, tinged with a heavy German accent. It is 6:00 anti-meridium on May 17, 1940. Andresy is taken by surprise by the 7th German Armored Division of General Rommel and is occupied by the enemy. The missions are quite nice and bring something new to a game that is already particularly dynamic. The game features models from over 13 countries. And of course, the ones that interested me the most were the French and Dutch models. You can also play with the superb and powerful American or Japanese ships. To grasp how we reached this compromised state, we must examine the political landscape before the German attack on May 10th, 1940, and you will quickly understand why this information is crucial for what follows. At the time of the launch of the attack, and this since March 22, 1940, the French government is led by Paul Reynaud, who is a French center-right politician, who succeeded Édouard Daladier, who himself came from the Radical Socialist Party, which is a left and center-left party. Having participated in the famous Popular Front of 1936, Reynaud, brought to power by a diverse coalition, positions himself as a unifier by forming a national unity government, securing a majority by a single vote. He now leads a government with delicate political backing, requiring him to manage various internal factions. But how does this division and political instability affect the war effort, which has effectively been ongoing since September 1939? Well, for once, it is direct, since the appointment of the person in charge of the command of the French armies is in the hands of the government, by making a highly political choice for many years. In January 1935, when General Maxime Weygand turned 68, he was forced to retire from his position as the head of the French armies due to reaching the age limit. He then strongly suggests General Alphonse Georges should succeed him. However, the decision is made amidst political tension and suspicion among the various actors in the political landscape at the time. And so it is that a more consensual candidate, enjoying political support within the Radical Socialist Party as well as a good reputation, receives the post. This is the famous General Maurice Gamelin. He is a general known for his intelligence and solid theoretical skills, while also having a character that is quite suitable for the current French political climate. He is an intellectual commander with a subdued personality, taking up little space and rarely imposing himself in discussions. Instead, he readily yields to political will, which allows him to implement his directives as he sees fit. However, this personality, apt for the tense 1930s politics, is ill-suited for 1940s, with a more energetic and decisive Paul Reynaud at the head of a country at war. Quickly, the two men can no longer stand each other, and Reynaud sets out to replace a Gamelin, whom he therefore judges too passive and wait and see, whose personality he deems ill-suited to the role entrusted to him. He would prefer other generals, such as the experienced Alphonse Georges, who had already been mentioned in 1935, and who remains until the end of the battle, in charge of the Northeast Front, where he demonstrates both his command abilities as well as some weaknesses. Or the energetic Maxime Weygand, who was brought out of retirement in August 1939 as war became evident and he was posted in the Middle East. But this change can only be made with the political support of Daladier and his party. However, he stubbornly continues to support the man he appointed as head of the armies. It's May 9th, 1940, the eve of the German attack. A worn-out Paul Reynaud puts forward his arguments for replacing Gamelin at the Council of Ministers. He concludes his indictment against Gamelin as follows: I cannot let responsibilities weigh on General Gamelin that do not correspond to either his means or his temperament. According to historian Max Chiavon, many ministers were convinced except for the Minister of Defense, Édouard Daladier. He indicates that he considers, I quote, that General Gamelin has all the qualities of a great leader. He has an indisputable and distinguished military background. His sharp intelligence is recognized by all, and he is much more active than many men his age. So he strongly opposes Reynaud and believes his perception of Gamelin is unfair. This prompts Paul Reynaud, who cannot do without the political support of Daladier's party, to submit the resignation of his government to the President of the Republic, which he accepts. However, this decision is kept secret by Reynaud, who, with the President's agreement, believes it is wiser while the country is at war to announce it when a new government is formed. So keep in mind that this is in a deeply divided political context, not conducive to difficult and quick decisions. That a Gamelin, who no longer has the confidence of a good part of a resigning government, is kept in place, as the German army masses on the Belgian and Luxembourg borders. On May 10th, Germany attacked 3 neutral nations, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, launching their offensive. Generalissimo Gamelin is jubilant as he learns that the Germans have entered Belgium in force, certain that they are operating according to the plan he has imagined. To identify available forces, it's crucial to understand the details of this plan. During the German breakthrough on May 13th to 14th, 1940, the heart of the plan, which is called the Island Plan, consists of the French and British troops coming to bear on the Isle River. In Belgium, in order to carry the fight outside the borders of France while supporting the Belgian army, this plan gradually incorporated a variant pushing to extend the front to Breda, which is in the Netherlands, as soon as a surprise attack from the Netherlands becomes likely. The objective being to present a continuous and extended front to the Germans while best supporting each of the allies involved. This variant is crucial to comprehend the following events. In the basic plan, the front, if taken from north to south, is occupied by the Belgian army. Then the British Expeditionary Force, followed by the powerful 1st French Army of General Billotte, concentrating experienced soldiers and modern equipment of excellent quality. Supported on his right by the 9th Army of General Korap, making the hinge between the 1st Army and the 2nd Army of General Ansiger. The latter is in charge of defending the Ardennes sector and links with the 3rd Army, which is placed on the Maginot Line. In this initial configuration, the strategic reserve is embodied by the 7th Army of General Giraud, which was a mobile and well-equipped army, whose role was to plug the gaps that would appear in the front. But this plan, rather well balanced, while being cautious and wait and see, is seriously weakened by its Breda Island variant, resulting in the dispatch of this 7th Army, serving as a mobile reserve to the Netherlands, in order to link up with the Dutch army, which is thought to be able to hold back the Germans by retreating behind its defensive system, the heart of which is the Westing Holland. This system essentially consists of bunkers and fortifications placed behind previously flooded lands. And so this maneuver is launched on the morning of May 10th, under the direct command of General Georges, to whom Gamelin completely delegates the operations in Belgium. This detached stance on the fight may seem odd but is not absurd, provided that roles and responsibilities are well defined. As seen in previous documentaries, the Germans start by pushing hard in Belgium, where the French troops are also playing their role perfectly and efficiently, even if surprised by the German advance's speed as noted in officer exchanges. On May 13th to 14th, the Germans surprised the Allies by massively crossing the Meuse, carrying nothing less than 4 of their powerful armored divisions, the Panzer divisions, on the other side of the river, seriously jostling a 9th Army that was not yet fully in place, while crushing a large part of the 2nd French Army, for which the losses are heavy. At several points, the Germans are now behind the French device. But while the 7th Army is in the Netherlands, does this mean that the French no longer have any reserves? Well, no. For once, the absence of a strategic reserve does not mean that the French have no reserves. On the contrary, each of the armies has their own reserve, usually mobile units such as armored or motorized divisions. Precisely, with the aim of plugging the gaps that would appear in the front. And that's exactly what they're going to try to do in this month of May, 1940. At this crucial time, the destiny of France and the Allies unfolds in the Champagne and Picardy regions. That one can logically wonder if yes or no the French could stop the German breakthrough. The 3rd Division launches the first major counterattack from May 15th in the Stone sector. Armored, which was precisely placed in reserve and had, in view of the events, the objective of sending the Germans back across the Meuse, this objective is not achieved, but the fighting is particularly violent. They last until May 25th, preventing the Maginot Line's encirclement. as much as to contain the German advance, the bulk of which is exerted towards the north. But why does this counterattack by a capable force fail? In this case, it boils down to two levels. The operation was supposed to take place as early as May 14th and could have, according to the German historian Karl-Heinz Frieser, simply put a stop to the German advance. This would have allowed the French army to reposition itself and face the breakthrough. However, the French take a precious day's delay due to logistical difficulties, particularly related to the heavy fuel consumption of the French B-1 tanks. Some French tactical errors, as much as an excellent exploitation of these by the Germans in the following days, finishes annihilating the few opportunities that the French tankers managed to create through their good combat ability and total commitment, which is quite logically and unfortunately costly in life and material. In parallel, further west, a delay mission is launched on May 17th at Montcornet by the 4th Division, armoured which, for accuracy, was hastily cobbled together and entrusted to Colonel de Gaulle, only 7 days in advance, that is to say on May 10th. His mission is to enable the hastily assembled French 6th Army to take position in response to the breakthrough, to prevent overflow southward towards Paris. While the Germans are advancing, the mission given to Colonel de Gaulle is achieved by the division while seriously threatening the rear of the German advance. The division is unsupportable, so the opportunity can't be exploited. However, it should be noted that these efforts still prevent an opportunistic envelopment of the Maginot Line and a sudden push towards Paris, as long as the German push is oriented towards the north. In summary, despite some resourcefulness, the French army lacked enough quickly mobilizable force in the sector. Strategically, after Stone's failed counteroffensive, a solution from the south of the breakthrough was improbable. However, in the north, the situation is completely different, as more troops are massed there, distributed within General Corrap's 9th Army and General Billot's powerful 1st Army. It is the latter who will manage to organize the French resistance on the ground by opposing his men to the rapid German progression. In this sector, there was a serious discrepancy between the movements imagined by the command in response to the breakthrough and the reality on the ground. The 9th Army's right wing was set to retreat by positioning itself on the Ardennes Canal. This movement was to be combined with a quick counter-attack by the mobile divisions placed in reserve of the 2nd Army in order to give time to the 6th Army, actively mounted and coming up from the south, to interpose itself between the two armies and contain the German thrust. In practice, however, the situation quickly turns into chaos. The counter-attacks of General Heinz Ziegler's 2nd Army fail, as we just mentioned, while on its side, General Corrap's 9th Army tends to move towards the Ardennes Canal in haste, and the disorder making it so that the men simply do not actually have the time to either complete or fully occupy the positions that have been assigned to them. This disorder emanates from all levels and from the confusion imposed by the rapid and audacious German movements. On the night of May 13th to 14th, the 53rd Infantry Division received 4 contradictory instructions, but seeing a blow to the north, a blow to the south. As a result, the various elements that make it up end up getting lost in the darkness and are simply untraceable. As the first light of day breaks, the German panzer divisions roll onto the Ardennes Canal, easily crushing the few unfortunate soldiers positioned on the bridges following their final orders. Consequently, on the evening of May 14th, the 9th Army's right wing is breached at various points, leading to chaos and panic. When the different units realize that powerful German units are now behind them, to worsen the situation, the 6th Army, meant to support this wing, only exists nominally and hasn't had time to assemble its various elements. It is unrealistic for it to position itself between the 9th and 2nd Armies. Faced with this reality, the command eventually abandons the idea and must rely on it several days later. And in an emergency on Colonel de Gaulle's 4th Armored Division, in order to allow this phantom army to take shape and then to position itself much further south on the Aisne. The 9th Army's right wing is broken and the army is being harshly jostled, particularly by the 5th and 7th Panzer Divisions, which are pushing on its left wing, but it surprisingly works better there. The 2nd and 11th French Army Corps that make it up mobilize their artillery and launch their infantry against the German tanks crossing the Meuse in the Dinant sector. But despite an effective resistance, it is with a bit of luck that several German units manage to infiltrate behind the French lines, where the defense, tenacious despite the situation, threatens to push them back. However, these efforts will lead to a brutal struggle between the powerful French tanks of the 1st Armored Division and the tanks of the skilled German general. Erwin Rommel. Of course, I must tell you about him in order to fully understand what is to follow. When the powerful 1st Armored Division of General Bruno arrives near Dinant on the evening of May 14th, the attack cannot be launched despite orders for a reason that weighs on all the French armored divisions. These powerful heavy tanks are out of fuel and must wait to be resupplied, unlike the Germans whose supply chain is much more flexible. The sense is traveling, for example, in jerrycans transportable by different types of vehicles. The French armored vehicles must wait for the arrival of heavy tanker trucks, only some of which are capable of moving off-road. They are also easily recognizable from the air, making them a prime target for German dive bombers, the Stuka. In fact, on the evening of May 14th, the tanker trucks are at the back of the column and will try to move up all night. However, by 9 anti-meridium German aviation had destroyed many of the trucks despite the darkness that significantly hindered the refueling of French tanks. It's exactly when 2 tank battalions, one heavy and one light, take their turn to refuel that Rommel's tanks fall upon them by surprise and cause a carnage severely damaging the combat capabilities of these battalions. However, Rommel does not linger there, and being unable to be pursued by tanks waiting to refuel, he is thus able to simply bypass the division and continue his journey to the west. The French counterattack on Flavian is halted primarily by its own failing logistics rather than German firepower. After a humiliating skirmish with Rommel, he continues on his way, leaving it to several elements of the 5th Panzer Division, effectively coordinated by their radio communications and supported by the Stukas, to finish the job. But despite everything, the fighting is much harder and more balanced throughout the day. This is mainly due to the courage of the French tankers, as evidenced by the Germans in their march journals and reports. However, courage alone cannot compensate for a failing organization. Thus, most French tanks fight without radio, while the few tanks with radio see their equipment break down. French tanks in fierce combat must coordinate by voice and flag. The situation is worsened by new fuel failures of heavy French tanks, which filled up in the morning but ran out of fuel later in the day. And consequently, immobilized in the middle of the fights, the excellent tactical coordination of the Germans, effectively supported by their aviation, allows the 5th Panzer Division to achieve a brilliant victory. This was achieved despite having inferior firepower. Thus, it is important to understand that once Rommel's tanks continue their way, the Germans are locally in a position of weakness when it comes to their firepower. However, the serious failures on the French side, partly compensated by the courage of the tankers, some of whom continue to fight in tanks that are immobilized in the middle of the battlefield, in reality only pose a very limited threat. And they become easy targets for artillery as well as for German aviation. The losses are thus particularly heavy on the French side when in the evening General Bruno gives the order to retreat. Out of the 170 tanks engaged in the morning, he is left with only 36, losing nearly 80% of his tanks. The following day, the situation is resolved, with only 16 remaining, confirming that the 1st Armored Division has effectively disbanded. This dramatic failure also allowed the German General Rommel to break through, then surpass the defense line that the 9th Army was trying to reconstitute, unbalanced by the German push. The following battles are very chaotic, allowing the 7th Panzer Division to reach Aven by May 16th. To occupy initial positions on the Sambre Canal at Loise on May 17th, before being limited the same day by the 5th Panzer Division. Seizing other positions on the canal, further north, on the evening of May 17th, the 9th Army has lost all coherence, while the Germans hold several bridges on the canal. The following day, despite a catastrophic situation, scattered French army elements will again attempt to reverse the situation. It is notably the 1st Light Mechanical Division, the 1st DLM, having effectively fought within the 7th Army the previous days, which will try to intervene. Several of its components struggled to reach the area due to congested roads, filled with fleeing civilians and retreating soldiers. For instance, on May 18th, the Somois S-35s of the 1st DLM were simply thrown across the path of General Rommel's German tanks. In the Jolimet sector, a violent confrontation occurs where 10 Somme tanks eliminate about 20 German armored vehicles. The price is nonetheless terrible for the French, as only one of the 10 French tanks engaged in the sector remains battle-ready after these clashes. Elsewhere, the situation is even worse. The German firepower decimated the infantry, and their anti-tank guns inflicted heavy casualties on the light French tanks. The fighting continued the next day, allowing the Germans to mass more troops in the Montmal forest sector. The 5th and 7th Panzer Divisions, 8th German Infantry Division and 20th Motorized Division are located. However, on May 20th, a counterattack is carried out by the 1st DLM of the 1st North African Infantry Division and the 39th Combat Tank Battalion. The French once again show courage and continue their offensives as long as they can. The result is nonetheless disastrous. As a result of these confrontations, the 39th Tank Battalion simply lost all of its tanks, the vast majority of which were destroyed in the fighting, taking their crews and officers with them, while others also found themselves out of fuel, isolated in the middle of the enemy advance, forcing the crews to sabotage their machines in an attempt to return to their lines. Similarly, many skirmisher regiments demonstrate enthusiasm in battle, at the cost of heavy losses. For example, 400 Tunisian skirmishers cornered by the Germans launch a bayonet charge, but only about 100 managed to get out of the situation. As for the 1st DLM, the elements it engaged simply come out weakened, reduced to a handful of armored vehicles, effectively destroying any remaining offensive capability. Once again, the French soldiers and their colonial empire comrades have shown remarkable courage, but this does not halt the rout occurring in other units, the organizational failures on the French side, nor the powerful attack led by Erwin Rommel. The attempts to halt the breakthrough are the last and do not affect Guderian's tanks pushing further south. On May 20th, 1940, at 2 ante-meridium, the first German troops reached the English Channel coast. The German breakthrough is finished, and they begin to reduce the Allied troops trapped in the north. But then, in light of everything we've seen so far, could the Allied forces have put an end to this breakthrough before they reached the coast and managed to trap them? Well, we have a quite clear answer for that, don't we? The core of the Allied device was the formidable French army, who could have offered a resolution backed by the British and Belgians. However, we must face the facts. The French army, as structured and organized in May 1940, was simply incapable of stopping the German breakthrough from May 14th. The courage and sacrifice of many units and even entire divisions that were thrown across the German advance only illustrated the capacity of the men on the ground, as much as the serious failures of the organizational system put in place ahead of the battle. In fact, we observe many missed opportunities, which are costly in both life and material. On one hand, this resulted from opportunities created by the capable and courageous men on the ground, but then destroyed by a rigid and slow structure, unable to react quickly enough to exploit those opportunities. As much as an appropriate reaction to the unexpected, so whose fault is it? It would be absurd to blame just one of the protagonists, as there were many contributing factors. While reading about the events, we can sense that specific actions or attitudes have aided German success, despite being unable to completely explain it solely based on those factors. In reality, the success of the German breakthrough is as much the result of an excellent German performance as of strategic and organizational wanderings on the French side. However, let's take a step back from what we've seen so far in order to understand why this analysis is relevant. A careful reading of the course of the battles illustrates the excellent preparation of the Germans ahead of the attack, an organization that was well thought out, and an interbranch coordination that was simply excellent. Despite unforeseen circumstances, which are inevitable in wartime, the German doctrine's flexibility enables quick and effective reactions to problems. The other essential point, notably highlighted by the German historian Frieser, is related to the incredible speed at which the Germans are advancing. Few armies at the time, and in fact even today, would have been able to meet this challenge. The German advance is all the more rapid, as the various Panzer Division generals do not hesitate to move forward as quickly as possible, despite contrary orders from their hierarchy. On the French side, a slightly slower German advance could simply have changed the course of history. The few hours that the French lose right and left quickly accumulate across all sectors, resulting in a delay that simply becomes impossible to catch up. For an army that is designed for a modernized positional war and not for a war of movement, French generals are also often accused, somewhat easily, of having been incompetent and the primary responsible for the disaster. While a certain dejection, likely due to intense fatigue, was evident in the French command on May 14th and 15th, the accusation does not appear fully warranted, especially for the generals leading the ground operations, however most quickly pulled themselves together. Despite it all, it is noteworthy that Generalissimo Gamelin seems to have had a serious and definitive moral failure, as he clearly expresses being defeated. This was early on, from May 15th, before taking a passive stance, at a time when the Allies needed a captain firmly steering a ship in the midst of a storm. This situation of inertia within the highest sphere of command is certainly compensated by a general, Georges, who, despite some misses and exhaustion observed by various witnesses, remains nonetheless admirable for his commitment and his willingness to meet the challenges imposed by the German breakthrough. The situation is then exacerbated when the French government replaces the cerebral Maurice Gamelin in the midst of battle, who simply seems to have given up, according to various testimonies of the time, by the energetic Maxime Weygand, who takes up his duties on May 19th, but who logically arrives far too late to be able to hope to stop a breakthrough that is already approaching the coast. This transition, at the worst possible time, thus cost the French army 3 more days in itself, but will however give it a new breath. I have good news. These events will be covered in the next mini-documentary. The Instruction. It's clear. If you're interested in the subject, there's not a minute to lose. Subscribe and click on the bell to be notified when the next part arrives. Today's topic was once again extremely rich and therefore inevitably dense. This question, complex but fascinating, therefore required a lot of work from me, whether it was research, writing, recording, or even editing. And I sincerely hope I've earned a thumbs up from you. Also know that I read all of you with great interest in the comments section, so don't hesitate to write to me. With that, I invite you to discover the little-known story of the heroes of the Battle of Lille in May 1940. In fact, you can see one of the works about it here. So who fought to their last bullet for France? France.